Yes, I need someone here right now. He's still at the counter. Please hurry.
This happened when I was 12, and it really wasn't that long ago. My name is Alex. It all took place in Connecticut when I went to stay with my aunt and uncle and my two cousins, Ryan and Brandon. Ryan was 18, Brandon was 16. Their house sat right up against a huge forest. Even in daytime, the trees looked tall and crowded, the woods always kind of dim. On the drive-in, my mom and my aunt both repeated the same warning. Do not go into that forest. It's massive. You'll get lost. I nodded like I understood, but I was a smart-mouthed kid and I didn't always do what I was told. I arrived on a Friday afternoon. Snow was coming down thick, clinging to every branch, turning the sky into a white ceiling. The first day I just relaxed. I unpacked, played video games with Ryan and Brandon, and watched the snow outside stack higher and higher. By the next morning, the yard was buried in deep powder. Around noon, I went outside alone, throwing snowballs at a fence post. Ryan and Brandon came out to join me, and we started messing around, packing snowballs and yelling across the yard. After a few minutes, Ryan said, "Yo, Alex, wanna check out the forest with us?" I froze for a second. I could practically hear my mom in my head. But the woods looked like a giant mystery wrapped in white, and I'd never seen snow like that where I lived. Curiosity won. "Yeah," I said. We pulled on our thick coats and boots and pushed our way into the tree line. The only sound was snow crunching and squeaking under our feet. In some drifts it hit our knees. In others it climbed almost to our waists. We walked maybe 10 minutes, laughing, pretending we were on some quest. Then we heard it. A scream, sharp, high, and shrill like a little girl's. All three of us stopped dead. The air felt instantly colder. I looked at Ryan, then Brandon. Their faces were tight and serious, but neither said anything. After a few seconds, Ryan shrugged a little and muttered, "Probably nothing." We started walking again. Not even a minute later, the exact same scream cut through the trees. Same pitch, same length, like someone had pressed a button to replay it. This time, Brandon's mask slipped. He tried to sound casual. "It's fine. There's nothing to..." The scream came a third time, perfectly identical. Something inside me snapped. My heart hammered, and even though our legs were half buried in snow, we twisted around and ran. Branches slapped at our jackets. Cold air burned my throat, but I didn't slow down. We burst out of the forest into my aunt's backyard, stumbling through the drifts until the trees were behind us. We were breathing so loudly we almost didn't hear the other sound. Banging. It came from the old wooden shed near the back fence, a hard, uneven pounding. Ryan, being the oldest, edged over and peeked inside while we stayed back. The shed was empty, but the latch was snapped and the door hung crooked. Several tools were missing from the wall. Ryan shut the door fast. None of us said what we were thinking, but we all knew it wasn't right. We should have gone straight to my aunt and uncle. Instead, we said nothing. We were more scared of getting grounded for going into the forest than we were of whatever was out there. That night I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet. Snowlight leaked in around the curtains. Around midnight, something started tapping on my window. Very light, very steady. Tap, tap, tap. My room was on the second floor, and outside that window there was only a slanted strip of rooftop, now covered in snow. No balcony, no tree branches close enough to reach the glass. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The tapping continued for what felt like hours, like someone carefully trying to get my attention without waking the rest of the house. It finally stopped when the sky started to brighten. By then I hadn't slept at all. Later that morning, the three of us shoveled the driveway. Afterward, we grabbed a football and tossed it around in the yard. A cold wind blew hard, and the sky stayed a flat gray. In the middle of a play, the scream came again. Same girl's voice, same perfect loop, but now it sounded much closer. Brandon bolted to the garage and came back with a metal baseball bat. Ryan grabbed a flashlight, even though it was daytime. I picked up a thick branch from the woodpile, clutching it like a club. We followed the sound toward a clump of bushes at the edge of the property. Half buried in snow, we found it. A small battery-powered radio. The volume was turned all the way up, and it was playing a recording of that same girl's scream on a loop. For a second, I actually felt relieved. It was just a recording, some idiot's prank. Then I noticed the footprints, big ones. They led away from the bushes toward the back of the property, deep imprints in the snow. Before we could say anything, a man stepped out from behind a pine tree. He wore a dark winter coat and a knitted cap pulled low over his forehead. His skin was pale, his cheeks were red from the cold. He raised a hand and called out almost friendly, "Hey guys, come with me. I've got something to show you." Ryan shouted back, "No." The man's mouth stretched into a wide smile, too wide. It didn't look right. His teeth showed in a way that made my stomach twist. For several long seconds, he just stood there grinning at us through the falling snow. Then he lunged. We spun and ran. Snow sprayed everywhere as we tried to move faster than our boots would allow. I heard him closing the distance, then a sudden grunt and a loud skid. He'd hit an icy patch and gone down. That was the only reason we made it. Those few extra seconds. We reached the back door, yanked it open, shoved each other through, and slammed it behind us. My aunt and uncle rushed in at the noise and found 3 shaking kids who could barely form sentences. Eventually, we spilled everything. The forest, the screams, the broken shed, the missing tools, the tapping on my window, the radio in the bushes, the man. My aunt's face went completely white. She grabbed the phone and called the police. Officers pulled up within minutes. They searched the yard, the shed, and the nearest stretch of woods. About an hour later, they found him walking along a side road not far away. He still had a hammer and a cordless drill hidden inside his coat. That was when I learned his name. Carl. He was my aunt's ex-boyfriend from years before. He'd moved out of state after she married my uncle, but now he'd come back. The officers told my aunt and uncle what they thought had happened. Carl had broken into the shed to grab tools. He'd planted the radio in the bushes and used a recording of a child screaming to lure kids in his direction. His plan, they believed, was to grab us, threaten us, and force my aunt to meet with him. He was convinced she'd leave my uncle if it meant saving us, and if she didn't, he was ready to hurt us. That's what they said his plan was. Carl went to jail that day. The police said the deep snow worked in our favor. It slowed him down, and that slip on the ice probably saved one of us from being caught before we reached the door. I still remember his face in my mind at that moment he fell. Eyes wide, arms flailing, that awful grin gone in an instant. That night my cousins and I slept in the living room with the TV on low. No one wanted to sleep alone. I felt safer, but I kept checking the windows anyway. Outside, snow kept falling, slowly covering our footprints, Carl's tracks, and the marks where the radio had been. The next morning, the police came back to collect the broken radio and take more photos of the shed. They told us we were lucky kids. I thought about what my mom and my aunt had said when I arrived. Don't go into that forest. They were right. We could have gotten lost or something far worse. I felt guilty for disobeying, but I was grateful the story ended the way it did. Even now, whenever snow starts coming down hard, I think of that week in Connecticut. The scream in the woods, the tapping on the glass, and the man who thought he could use fear to tear a family apart. He failed, and I'm glad he did. It was a little after 1 o'clock in the morning, though it felt much later. The house was dark and still. Each of us was in our own room. I was 8 at the time, the youngest, but my sisters trusted me with one important thing. I was the only one who knew the alarm code. A few nights earlier, there had been gunshots somewhere in our neighborhood. So Mom had cranked the security system up to the highest setting before leaving for her night shift at the hospital. I lay in bed with a flashlight, rereading the same comic page for the 3rd time. Then the siren shattered the silence. The alarm screamed so loud, it felt like it shook the windows and rattled around inside my chest. I threw off my blanket and charged into the hallway at the same time my sisters did. In the weak glow of the nightlight, Lena's and Kayla's eyes looked huge. "Code!" Lena yelled, though her voice was almost swallowed by the noise. I didn't need the reminder. My hands were shaking, but they moved on autopilot, taking me to the keypad by the front door. I punched in Mom's 4-digit code. The siren cut off halfway through a wail. The sudden stillness felt even heavier than the noise. For several seconds, none of us spoke. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Did you open anything?" Kayla finally asked. I shook my head. "No. I've been in my room." From the hallway, we checked every door and window we could see. Everything was still shut, every lock in place. The only entrance we didn't go near was the door inside the garage that opened straight to the backyard. Mom called it the weak spot because it faced the alley. We tried to laugh it off, maybe a bad sensor, maybe a cat by a window. While we stood there in the hallway trying to convince ourselves, we heard a single sharp crack from outside. Just one, like a distant gunshot or some leftover firework, even though it wasn't anywhere near July. We froze again, straining to listen. The silence returned. Nothing. Then the alarm went off a second time. I have never felt fear slam into me the way it did then. My legs just stopped working. Lena grabbed my arm, but this time I couldn't make myself run to the keypad. The siren roared right over our voices. Lena and Kayla half dragged, half pushed me down the hall until the panel came into view. I forced my fingers to hit the right numbers. The siren died mid-howl. Again, every visible door and window looked closed. We all stared toward the doorway that led to the garage, but none of us wanted to step closer. We huddled in the hallway for almost a minute, listening to the creaks of the house and the thudding of our hearts. The air felt different somehow, like someone else might be standing just out of sight. Lena made the call. "Mom's room," she said. "Lock it." We hurried across the hall into her bedroom. The master had the best lock in the house, and beyond that was the bathroom, with another door if we needed to fall back again. Kayla kicked the door shut, slid the bolt, and yanked the curtains closed. The room felt bigger than I remembered, but the corners seemed darker, like they were holding their breath. We grabbed whatever we could find to use as weapons. Kayla held a heavy table lamp by the base. Lena picked up Mom's old softball bat. I clutched a thick metal perfume bottle that felt solid and cold in my hand. We sat on the carpet by the bed, our backs to the wall, listening. Every gust of wind that rattled a branch made us flinch. Minutes dragged into an hour, then another. Each time my head started to droop, some sound would jolt me awake. A house creak, a car far away, my sister's shifting. I kept watching the thin strip of light under the bedroom door, half expecting to see a shadow pass across it. Around 4 a.m., the sky began to lighten. Birds started chirping outside. Normal morning noises slowly seeped back in, stretching over the night's tension like a thin blanket. We still waited another 30 minutes before Lena finally turned the lock and cracked the door. The hallway lay empty. The little nightlight still glowed. Nothing moved. We walked together through each room of the house. Every latch was still drawn. The front, side, and back doors were locked. Nothing looked disturbed. At last, we came to the door to the garage. My stomach flipped as I turned the knob and eased it open. The garage was dim. A single bare bulb overhead threw long shadows over boxes, tools, and the closed big door. The main door's bar and lock were still in place, yet the air was wrong. It held a faint smell of cold, like night air clinging to concrete. None of us stepped outside to check the dirt by the back wall. We didn't want to know if there were footprints. We shut the garage door and agreed that was enough. Soon after, Lena called our older brother across town. I called Mom at the hospital. She sounded calm but serious. She said she'd check the security logs when she got home and reminded us that only she had the key to the backyard gate. No one should have been able to reach that garage door without climbing a fence. Mom came home a little after sunrise. She checked the yard, the fence, the gate. No boards were broken, no latch forced. The camera above the front porch hadn't caught anything unusual. But the alarm control's sensor log told a different story. Twice within 3 minutes, the system had recorded the same thing. Garage side door. Something, or someone, had tried that door twice. The company later said maybe it was a glitch. They couldn't explain the faint marks we all saw on the outside knob, thin scratches that looked like they'd been made by a tool. Mom had the entire lock replaced that afternoon, but the real damage had already been done. Lena started sleeping with a pocket knife under her pillow. Kayla began wearing headphones most nights so she wouldn't jump at every creak. I'd wake up sweating whenever wind rattled the gutters. Even Mom admitted she never felt fully safe in that house again. A few years later, the landlord said the roof needed major repairs. We took that as our chance and moved across town. None of us complained. After we settled into the new place, Mom said she felt relieved to leave that night behind. Sometimes on weekends we drive past the old house just to see it. The front lawn looks smaller now. Someone painted the siding a lighter color. The garage door is the same though. I always wonder if the lock point I once gripped in the dark is still there beneath a fresh coat of paint, hiding its tiny scars. I turned 13 this year. People like to say kids forget scary things as they grow up. They're wrong. That night is still sharp in my mind. The two sudden screams of the alarm, the single crack in the distance, the chill when I opened the garage door. We never found out who or what tried to get in. Maybe that's the worst part. A name would have given it an end. The unknown can follow you a lot longer. Before the next story, imagine this being told on a late-night channel. If you were hearing this there, they'd remind you to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like it. I started at a tiny school in November 2017. When I say tiny, I mean roughly 50 students total. I know, that's nothing. I transferred there because my old school was way too advanced for me. I was drowning in the work and needed a place where the classes were easier and I could actually focus. This new place was called the Smith School in New York City. It used to be a school for kids with criminal records. Over time, it turned into a school for kids with special needs. I stayed there for almost a full year before moving on to a bigger school. With so few students, you basically ended up knowing everyone. I was friends with pretty much the entire student body. I even started dating a guy there. His name was Kyle Fernandez. We got together around February or March of 2018, if I remember right. Kyle was at Smith because he'd been kicked out of his previous school for selling weed to other students. Somebody finally snitched, and that was that. For the first 2 or 3 months, he treated me well. He was kind to people at school too, but he was high most of the time. I never smoked weed and still won't. Kyle respected that. He never pushed me to try anything. Sometimes he'd take me to hang out with his friends outside of school. They were just like him, always smoking, sometimes dealing, their pants sagging so low you could see half their underwear. It burned my eyes to look at them. But Kyle loved me, and back then I loved him. When he and his friends did things that could get them in serious trouble, I stayed out of it. And somehow, he never tried forcing me into that world. Months went by, and our relationship stayed more or less the same, until one July night when everything changed. Kyle came over to my apartment late. We spent about an hour in my bedroom talking. It felt like any other night at first. Then my phone started blowing up with notifications. It was my friend Liam. I opened our messages and saw he'd sent me a string of edgy dark memes, somewhat messed up but also hilarious. I started laughing hard. Kyle asked, "Who's texting you?" "It's just my friend Liam," I said. "He sends me stupid stuff like this all the time." Kyle held out his hand. "Let me see." I pulled my phone back. "It's nothing. He's just a longtime friend. He always makes me laugh." Kyle's face tightened. He demanded louder now to see my phone. My smile vanished. A weird nervousness crept in. I muttered no. The next few seconds felt unreal. Kyle snatched the phone out of my hand and hurled it at the wall. The screen exploded. Glass flew everywhere, across the floor, onto my lamp, my dresser, my bed. I just stared, stunned. On pure instinct, I raised my arms to shield my face. I didn't know what he was going to do next. He grabbed my left forearm. In his other hand, he held a jagged piece of glass from my shattered screen. Before I could move or say anything, he drove it into my arm. He yanked it out almost immediately, but the pain lit up my nerves like fire. I screamed. I screamed so loud I'm convinced another continent could have heard me. As I cried out, Kyle shouted over me, "Are you happy now?" Then he ran out of my room and out of the apartment. I wish my mom had been home. Of course she wasn't. I stumbled into the bathroom, shaking, and washed the wound with soap and water. It burned so badly I thought I might pass out. After that, I pulled out the biggest bandage I could find and slapped it over the cut. Then I went back, picked my phone up off the floor, peeled off what was left of the shattered screen protector, and blocked Kyle on everything. If he ever tried to come see me again, I planned to make it very clear. I never wanted to see him. He never did come back. I never saw him on the street either. Still, I checked my surroundings all the time, but I was safe. I told no one what he'd done. When people asked what happened with Kyle, I just said our relationship wasn't going in the right direction. Everyone seemed to accept that. I kept the real reason locked away. I was too scared. That fear lasted until the summer of 2023. It was early August. I was at work when I felt my phone buzzing in my pocket. I checked the screen. An incoming call from a 2112 number. If you don't know, 2112 is a home area code in New York City. It wasn't my home phone. I knew that number by heart. I assumed it was some business or office calling. Curious, I answered. "Hello," a woman's voice came on the line. She asked if I was who I am. "Yes," I said, already uneasy. "Who's this?" "This is New York Presbyterian Hospital on 42nd Street, Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center," she said. "I'm calling to inform you that your mother, along with 10 other people, has been hit by a car. She is in critical condition." My hand started shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I fought to keep my voice steady and said, "I'll be there right away." I ran out of work without explaining anything to anyone. I just left. It took me about 10-15 minutes to get to the hospital. At the front desk, I asked for my mother and was told she was in a room down the hall. I ran there and stopped in the doorway. She was lying in the bed, hooked up to machines, completely still, in a coma. I sat next to her and broke down, sobbing harder than I ever had in my life. A nurse came in and I forced myself to ask what had happened. She told me a man had stolen a car while drunk, driven the wrong way down a street, then hopped onto a sidewalk. He'd hit a cyclist first, then my mother and about 5 others, and they all went flying together. I was stunned. I asked if they knew who the driver was. "We don't know yet," she said. "We'll probably know by tomorrow." The next day brought one piece of good news and one piece of news that shattered my world. Good news: my mom woke up. Bad news: the man who'd stolen that car and hit my mother and several other people was Kyle. I was in total disbelief. He'd been tackled by Good Samaritans at the scene and arrested, but knowing that didn't calm me. I wanted to scream, to tear the whole courtroom apart, but I knew that would only humiliate me. A few days later, we learned my mother would never walk again. It felt like my life had split in half. When the news story broke, people across the country saw the footage. 7 bodies tangled together on the street. Many assumed it was a terrorist attack at first. I decided I would speak up, about Kyle, about what he'd done to me. But I wanted my identity kept private. I wrote a letter to the court where his case was being heard, describing in detail how he'd assaulted me with the glass from my phone. After my letter was read in court, another woman Kyle had dated in 2022 came forward. She shared her own story of domestic violence at his hands. Knowing she felt brave enough to speak because I had spoken warmed something in me. At least we weren't alone. We could stand together. In the end, Kyle was found guilty of domestic violence against both of us and guilty in his drunk driving case. He was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. 2.5 years for hurting 2 partners and crashing into 7 victims with a car, leaving most of them with permanent injuries, including my mother, who will never walk again. The sentence felt insulting. It should have been 20 years, not barely more than 2. I'm sure he had an incredible lawyer to walk away with such a short time. I have nothing but hatred for Kyle now. He changed my mother's life for the worse, and I don't think I'll ever fully get over that. Maybe I sound dramatic, but this is how I feel. While he serves his time, I hope he actually thinks about what he's done. I hope he gets real help and goes to rehab. My advice, if he ever cared to hear it, would be to leave New York City, such a toxic environment for him, and start a new life somewhere else, where he helps people instead of hurting them. Whether he'll ever do that, I don't know. This happened just a few days ago on a warm June evening. I live in a small town, the kind where most streets go dead quiet after sunset. On the edge of town, there's a 24-hour self-service car wash, 4 concrete bays, old soap machines, and a rusted Coke machine that's always empty. Dim yellow bulbs hang over each bay, buzzing softly even before you kill your engine. I usually wash my truck during the day. The place feels safer in sunlight. But that afternoon, every bay was taken, so I decided to wait until later. Around 9:30 p.m., I pulled in. The asphalt still radiated warmth. Bugs circled the overhead lights. Only one other car sat in the lot, a dusty sedan parked far away near the vacuums. When I stepped out, I noticed a man standing about 20 yards off by one of the vacuum posts. Baggy jeans, stained t-shirt. At first I figured he was just cutting through the lot on his way to the all-night gas station across the street. People do that all the time. I didn't pay him much attention. I dug some quarters out of my pocket, fed the machine, and squeezed the trigger on the pressure wand. The spray roared so loud it drowned everything else. As I circled the truck, I heard a strange metallic thump. I let go of the trigger and glanced over. The same man was slamming his forehead against the metal housing of the vacuum, hard, over and over, like he couldn't feel it. A dark patch had started to appear where his skin hit the steel. I thought, great, another guy spun out on something. We get our share of addicts in town. Usually, if you ignore them, they drift away. I stayed alert but went back to washing. A few minutes later, a faded red 90s Chevy pickup rattled into the lot. The body was dented, the muffler hanging low. It rolled right up to the man. Without exchanging a word that I could see, he climbed into the passenger seat. The driver, just a hazy shape behind a dirty windshield, gunned the engine and pulled out toward the road. I felt a wave of relief. Problem solved. I finished rinsing off the soap, hung the nozzle back up, and got into my truck. I drove out of the car wash, turned left toward home, and spotted the same red Chevy at the pumps across the street at the 24-hour station. Hard to miss with a crooked tailgate and mismatched door. I drove past and put it out of my mind. 3 blocks later, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Headlights. No big deal. It's night, there are going to be headlights. But when I turned right onto Willow Street, the lights turned behind me. I felt my pulse tick up. At the next intersection, I turned left without signaling. The headlights followed. That's when my nerves really kicked in. I stepped on the gas and started weaving through the neighborhood grid, making random turns, rolling one stop sign I'd normally never run. My tires squealed once on a corner. After 3 fast turns, I shot up a long gravel driveway leading to an empty barn with a for sale sign out front. I killed my lights and waited, holding my breath. After a few long seconds, the red Chevy roared past the mouth of the driveway without slowing down. Only when its tail lights were just faint red dots did I back out and head home the opposite way. My heart pounded in my temples, but I told myself it was over. I pulled into my driveway, felt that little bubble of safety that comes with seeing your own porch light. I locked the truck, headed toward the house, and for some reason glanced toward the backyard. The light in the shed was on. The wooden door stood wide open. My first thought was that my little brother had been rummaging for tools to work on his own truck and forgotten to shut off the light again. Happens all the time. I walked over to close it. Our yard backs onto a thin strip of woods, oaks and pines so thick you can't see far in. I stepped inside the shed long enough to pull the string and kill the bulb. As I swung the door shut, I heard it. A crunch in the leaves beyond the tree line. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Every hair on my arm stood up. I locked the shed and hurried back to the house, checking the yard as I moved. Once I was inside, I double-checked every window and door, including the one to the backyard. I had just reached the stairs when something pounded on the back door. 3 heavy blows, then silence. A thin curtain covered the window and the door, and the porch light was burned out, so I couldn't see anything outside. Before I could react, the pounding started again. Harder. The glass rattled in the frame. "I'm calling the police," I yelled. The pounding stopped. Through the quiet that followed, I heard a sound that made my stomach twist, the same strange laugh I'd heard back at the car wash. Raspy, childish, wrong. It faded, nothing else happened. I waited 5, maybe 10 minutes, phone in my hand, every muscle tight. Finally, I went upstairs and shut my bedroom door. Maybe that was it, I told myself. Maybe he'd finally gone. At some point after midnight, I fell asleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke up thirsty. I went downstairs in the dark, still half asleep, and felt a cold draft. The back door was open an inch. My stomach dropped. My first stupid instinct was to slam it shut. Then I heard a faint rustle from the living room. I leaned just far enough around the doorway to look in. In the dim light from a street lamp filtering through the curtains, I saw the outline of someone crouched behind the couch. Wide shoulders, a head bowed slightly, slow, heavy breathing. I backed away, climbed the stairs as quietly as I could, and locked my bedroom door. Hands trembling, I dialed 911. While I whispered to the dispatcher, a floorboard creaked outside my room. Then that laugh again, closer now. The footsteps on the stairs were slow and uneven. He stopped at my door and began pounding, screaming slurred threats and words I'd never even heard before. The thin wood shook. The dispatcher stayed calm, told me officers were already on my street. I told her the intruder was inside, upstairs, right outside my door. She said she'd tell them to come in through the back because it was open. The pounding stopped. For a second, there was silence. Then I heard heavy boots pounding down the stairs. After that, shouting from downstairs. Doors thudding. A metal clatter on the kitchen tile, something skidding. A few minutes later, someone knocked on my bedroom door and identified himself as an officer. When I opened it, 2 more cops were in the kitchen, cuffing the man from the car wash. A large kitchen knife lay on the linoleum near his feet. He stared at me with glassy eyes, mumbling nonsense. A thin crust of dried blood still marked his forehead, where he'd been smashing it into the vacuum earlier. They charged him with breaking and entering, possession of a weapon, and a handful of drug offenses. I keep replaying what could have happened if I'd walked fully into the living room instead of going back upstairs. How close I was to him without realizing it. Every tiny choice, the random driveway, locking the doors, calling 911 from my room instead of going down, feels huge in hindsight. I don't ever want to know what he planned to do. So if there's anything to take from what happened to me, trust your instincts, look around you, and lock every single door before you go to sleep. My name is Damon. To explain what you're about to hear, I have to start with how I first learned about it. Back in the early 2000s, I dated a girl named Jenna for several years. One day she told me about something that had happened to her at her aunt's apartment, something that, to this day, I can't find any rational explanation for. I knew Jenna well. She was sweet and a little naive, in a harmless, endearing way. She'd never had any history of mental illness, no hallucinations, nothing like that before or after what happened. On the rare occasions she tried to exaggerate a story, you could always tell. She was a terrible liar. By then I could read her easily enough to know when she was even slightly stretching the truth. With this, she wasn't. What I'm about to describe is exactly how she told it to me, as best as I can remember, without adding anything for effect. One afternoon, Jenna drove over to visit her aunt and her cousin Stacy. She and Stacy were about the same age and had grown up together, more like sisters than cousins. Her aunt and Stacy lived in a 2-story apartment complex in a rougher part of town. The building had parking in the back for tenants, but all the front doors and the single big windows faced the street. From what I remember, there were no back doors, no side windows, just the front entrance and that one large window for each unit. Inside, the apartment was small, a living room and kitchen up front, a short hallway leading to a bathroom at the very end, and 2 bedrooms off that hallway. Her aunt's on the right, Stacy's further down, with 1 light fixture in each room. Jenna was very close with her family and had spare keys to most of their places. She was welcome to come and go almost whenever she liked, even without calling first. She parked up front that day, near a dirt patch used for extra parking. From there, she couldn't see whether her aunt's or Stacy's cars were in the back lot, but she assumed at least one of them was home. She climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, walked 3 doors down along the open breezeway and tried the knob. It was locked, which wasn't unusual in that neighborhood. Jenna pulled out her key and let herself in, as she often did. Inside, the apartment was quiet. She didn't see anyone in the living room, so she turned left into the tiny kitchen. It was empty. "Hey guys, it's just me," she called. No answer. Feeling a little puzzled, she walked back out and headed down the hallway. She glanced into her aunt's room on the right. The bed was made. Nobody there. "Hey Stace, it's Jen," she called again. Still nothing. By now, Jenna told me she was pretty sure no one was home. The apartment was too small for someone not to hear her calling. Yet she noticed 1 light still on, the ceiling light in Stacy's room at the end of the hall. A faint glow spilled into the hallway. The bathroom at the very end was dark and empty. Jenna walked the few remaining steps to Stacy's doorway and looked in. On the left, she saw the dresser. Straight ahead was the bed. Stacy was sitting on the edge of it, upright and very still, facing away from the doorway. Jenna felt a brief wave of surprise. If Stacy was home, why hadn't she answered? Standing in the doorway, Jenna asked, "Hey, are you okay?" Stacy didn't react. No turn of the head, no shift in posture, nothing. Concern crept in. Something about her cousin's stillness felt wrong, like she was frozen in place. Jenna stepped into the room, moving closer to the bed. 1,000 possibilities rushed through her mind. Was Stacy sick? Had she passed out? Was she hurt? Just as Jenna neared the foot of the bed, she heard the front door open. Groceries rustled and bumped together. Her aunt's familiar voice floated down the hallway, talking casually with someone. The second voice was unmistakable, Stacy. Laughing, chatting, responding to her mom like she always did. At the sound, Jenna said her thoughts slowed down, like someone hit a slow-motion button in her brain. Confusion and dread crashed together. Her heart started pounding. She called out, half turning her head, saying something like, "I just stopped by, but you weren't home." The words died in her throat as she turned back fully toward the bed. The figure on the mattress had turned its head. Jenna swore to me it rotated in a way no human neck should, without the shoulders or torso moving at all. And it was not Stacy's face looking at her. The thing sitting on the bed had gray skin, the color of slate. Where there should have been gentle curves, there were sharp, bony angles. The mouth was a thin, lipless slit. Its eyes were jet black, sunk deep into bruised-looking hollows. It wasn't angry. It wasn't smiling. It was worse, completely flat with the faintest squint like it was studying her. She said staring into those eyes felt like staring into a dark mirror. She could see her own reflection, tiny and distorted. She knew, in that moment, that whatever was wearing her cousin's shape was not human. She screamed and bolted down the hallway. In the kitchen, her aunt and the real Stacy were unloading grocery bags. Jenna burst in, shaking and trying to explain, words tripping over themselves. Finally, she just grabbed Stacy's arm and cried out something like, "No, you don't understand. There's another you in your room. She's wrong. She's in your room." Her aunt, alarmed, grabbed a baseball bat from the corner. The 3 of them crept back down the hallway. Jenna hesitated at the doorway, half expecting that gray face to be waiting. The room was empty. The only sign anyone had been on the bed was a slight depression on the mattress, like someone had just been sitting there. Her aunt checked the closet under the bed behind the dresser. Nothing. They searched the whole apartment. There were no back exits, no open windows to slip out of, no attic hatch, no trick doorways. Only the one front door, which they'd just seen her aunt and Stacy come through with their arms full. Jenna never went back to that apartment again. I don't remember if her aunt and cousin moved out soon after or stayed, but I know the story left a mark on her. She wasn't the type to make something like that up, and she never told it for attention. She told it like a confession, like admitting the world was darker and stranger than she'd realized. And I believed her. I work for an outdoor outfitter, so my kids and I already had quality camping gear. My wife, though, had never come with us on a trip. I wanted her first experience to feel more like a quirky hotel than a nylon coffin. So I bought an enormous family tent, the kind you can nearly stand up in. We planned a weekend at a lake about an hour from home with some friends and their kids. By mid-afternoon, the new tent stood tall on a flattened patch of grass. I tossed our sleeping bags, backpacks, and cooking box inside, zipped the door, and took my family for a slow walk around the shoreline. The sky looked harmless. The weather radio mentioned nothing about storms, but that lake sat in a valley known for sudden microbursts, violent, localized downdrafts that can whip up out of nowhere. Halfway around the lake, the air changed. The wind flipped like someone threw a switch. Trees bent on the ridge. Sand dusted off the beach and sprayed across the water. White caps jumped up on what had been a glassy surface. I saw something bright tumbling across the lake and realized with a sinking feeling that it was our beautiful new tent, gear and all. Without thinking, I kicked off my shoes and dove in. The water was shock cold. I swam hard, lungs burning, until I could grab a flapping tie-down cord and haul the whole soggy mess back to shore before it sank. The damage was ugly. The rainfly was ripped. 2 poles had snapped. Everything inside was soaked through. A few small things, my daughter's flashlight, a little camp pillow, vanished forever. We tried not to obsess over the lost gear. Instead, we built 2 big fires to dry what we could and decided we'd sleep in my wife's ancient station wagon. It was more than 35 years old and barely held together, but it had a roof, and that was enough. Our friends rolled in just before dusk. They loaned us spare blankets and squeezed our kids into their tents. Spirits came back up. We grilled hot dogs, made jokes about my unplanned swim, and swore the worst part of the trip had already happened. Around midnight, my wife and I climbed into the wagon. We folded the back seat forward, slid an air mattress in, and crawled under still damp quilts. The wind rattled every loose piece of metal on that old car, but we felt mostly safe. Then the first fat raindrops hit the roof. The sprinkle became a torrent. Water sheeted sideways, blasting through cracked window seals, soaking our heads and pillows. Lightning tore open the sky so close that white ghosts of it floated behind my eyelids. I grabbed the walkie-talkie. "You kids okay?" I asked our son and daughter. "Yeah, this is awesome," my son shouted back, trying to sound fearless in front of his friends. Seconds later, a bolt struck a huge pine between the tents. The trunk exploded. Bark flew like shrapnel. The ground shock made the station wagon actually bounce. All the kids screamed at once. The walkie filled with overlapping cries. One of the parents yelled for everyone to get to the cars. They stumbled through mud in their pajamas, faces lit by strobe flashes of lightning, hair whipping in the wind. "This is camping," my wife said through chattering teeth. "Never again." We crammed every kid we could into our wagon. There were 8 of us in that car, knees pressed against dashboards and seatbacks, rain leaking on us from 2 directions. Then the wind did something strange. It softened. The rain lessened for just a heartbeat. And in that moment of weird calm, everyone in the car heard it. A long, low wail rolling out of the forest, across the flooded campsites and the lake. It wasn't the wind. Not that night. This had a rhythm, a rise and fall, almost like a voice, but not in any language I knew. It had the same shape as a human cry, but it sounded like breath being forced through a broken whistle. We all went silent. Lightning flashed, turning the world white for an instant, and in that flash I saw someone standing at the edge of the trees. tall and thin. No coat, no hat, just a dark silhouette cut out of the night and pinned to the trunks. The light vanished. Darkness fell like a curtain. "Dad," my youngest whispered, "who's out there?" "I don't know," I said, and I instantly wished I'd lied. The rain came back harder. Hail started pinging off the roof. Somewhere out there in the chaos, something metal clanged. A loose tent pole, maybe, or maybe not. 2 more times the sky flashed. 2 more times I saw that same figure in the same place, unmoving. Between the flashes, the wail went on, floating over the lake. It wasn't an animal I recognized. It wasn't human words. We stayed like that for about 40 minutes. Water dripped down the back of my neck. 8 of us huddled together, cold and exhausted, breath fogging the windows. My wife sat with a hand on each child, knuckles white. Eventually, the storm limped away. Thunder rolled off into distant hills. The wailing faded with it. I looked toward the tree line. No more shadow, just darkness, torn tents, and broken branches. The station wagon refused to start, so we stayed in that freezing, leaking shell until dawn crept over the horizon. In the morning, everyone spilled out slowly. Our shoes sank in mud that felt like wet cement. We found the pine the lightning had split, its trunk jagged open, black and raw inside. No footprints led to or from the place where I'd seen the figure. One friend joked, weakly, that it was just the storm playing tricks on my eyes. No one laughed. We made oatmeal on a propane stove. Steam curled from clothes we'd strung between cars like drooping flags. The kids eventually thought enough to joke about the tree that nearly crushed them. My wife stayed quiet, arms folded, until the last cooler was loaded. "Home," she said. Now, back in our driveway, she announced she was done with camping forever. 2 months later, she agreed to try again, far from that valley lake. She was right. Nothing ever matched that night. For the next 28 years, we camped through drizzle, heat waves, even the outer edge of a mild hurricane. But we never heard another wail under lightning. We never again saw something tall and still watching us from the trees. I repaired that first tent myself with patches and thread. We still own it. One side bears long, reddish stains from that storm. Sometimes, when the moon hits it at just the right angle, those stains almost resemble a tall, thin figure. My wife insists it's just dirt. She still refuses to camp anywhere near that lake. I don't blame her. It was a cold night in early November 2018. I was working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour convenience store just outside Asheville, North Carolina. The store sat alone on the edge of town. After midnight, the road out front went mostly dead. Now and then a trucker or late-night traveler would roll by, but for the most part, it was just me and the hum of the refrigerators. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I killed time stocking shelves, wiping counters, sweeping the same spots twice. Around 1 a.m., a couple of teenagers blew in, laughing too loud, grabbing energy drinks and junk food. They left as quickly as they came, the slam of the door echoing in the empty space. Silence settled again, thick and uneasy. I watched the clock crawl forward. Around 2:30 a.m., headlights swept across the front windows. A beat-up pickup, a rust-spotted, loud old thing, pulled into the farthest parking space from the door. The engine kept idling. The headlights stayed on, aimed straight at the front of the store. Through the glass, I could only make out a hunched figure behind the wheel. He didn't move, just sat and stared. I tried to stay calm, wiping the counter slower than necessary, glancing up at the windows every few seconds. Maybe he was just on a phone call. Maybe he'd fallen asleep. Finally, the truck door opened with a long creak. The man climbed out. He was tall and skinny, wearing a worn brown jacket. A baseball cap sat low on his head, shadowing his face. He walked toward the entrance with an odd, deliberate slowness, each step heavy. I forced a polite, "Hey, how's it going?" as he came in. He barely looked at me, no greeting in return. He started pacing the aisles, not really browsing, just walking. Occasionally, he'd stop and stare at an item for too long, then move on. Something about the way he moved, the quiet, intense focus, the slowness, made the hairs on my neck stand up. I pretended to reorganize things behind the counter, watching him in the angled mirrors that showed the aisles. After several minutes, he picked up a single can of soda and brought it to the register. Up close, I got a better look. His face was gaunt, skin pale. His eyes had a strange emptiness to them, like the lights were on but nothing was home. He met my gaze for half a second as he handed me a crumpled dollar bill, then dropped his eyes immediately, as if on purpose. I rang up the drink, gave him his change. He didn't say a word. He walked out and a rush of relief washed through me. I watched him head back to his truck, expecting him to get in and drive off. Instead, he leaned against the side of the truck, slowly sipping his soda, staring directly at the store. Minutes dragged by. My nerves frayed. I thought about locking the doors, but store policy said we had to stay open and unlocked 24/7. Eventually, he climbed back into the cab. The engine rumbled. The truck pulled out and disappeared down the road. I let out a long breath. Maybe I'd blown it out of proportion. Just a weird guy on a late-night sugar run. The store sank back into quiet. I busied myself cleaning the coffee station. Not even 20 minutes later, familiar headlights swept across the windows again. My stomach clenched. The same battered pickup pulled into the lot, this time much closer to the entrance. The engine idled. He sat there again, silhouetted. I stepped back behind the counter and picked up the store phone, holding it in my hand just in case. The plastic felt oddly comforting. The man got out, moving faster this time, striding straight for the door. When he came in, his eyes were locked on me. No wandering the aisles, no pretense. He walked right up to the counter and stood there unmoving for several seconds that felt like a lot longer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rough, like it scraped on the way out. "Were you here yesterday?" he asked. I hesitated, glancing toward the security cameras as if they could answer for me. I had worked the previous night. Nothing had stood out. "Yeah," I said carefully, "I was." He studied my face, his lips twitched slightly. "Did anybody come in?" he asked, asking about me. His tone had shifted, more urgent, slightly desperate. I searched my memory. No one had, no one who looked like him, no one asking questions. "No," I said. "Nobody asked about you." He kept staring for another few seconds, eyes flicking from one of mine to the other, like he was trying to decide if I was lying. Then, without another word, he spun around and walked quickly back out. His truck roared to life and tore out of the parking lot, tires screeching for a second on the pavement. I stood there gripping the phone, heart pounding, not sure what I'd just been dragged into. The rest of the night crawled by. Every time headlights passed the store, I tensed. Every tiny noise in the lot made me jump. When the morning shift finally came, I told my coworker what had happened. In the bright light of 7 o'clock a.m., it sounded less terrifying and more like I'd overreacted. A few days later, scrolling local news online, I saw his face again. The headline above his photo made my blood run cold. "Man wanted 4 questioning in missing persons case." The article said a local woman had disappeared 2 nights earlier. Last seen at a gas station just outside town, alone, late at night. Investigators were looking for a tall, thin man in a brown jacket driving a beat-up pickup. They included a grainy photo. It was him. Same empty eyes, same lean, pale face. I remembered the way he'd asked if someone had come looking for him, the edge in his voice. Had he thought someone here could place him at the scene? Was he trying to figure out what people knew? I never saw him again. I quit that job not long afterward. Every night shift after that felt like a replay of those hours, waiting for him to come back through that door. Even now, years later, driving past that lonely 24-hour store makes my heart race. The image of his face on that screen flashes in my mind, along with all the questions that still have no answers.